Problems and tasks for the transformation of the higher type cooperatives into state farms. From a talk at the daily meeting with the secretaries of the CC of PLA, September 9, 1980. The study of the situation of higher type cooperatives is based mainly on some figures and achievements, which it is essential to know. But it is not only the figures which make us take this or that decision. The whole problem must be seen more widely, that is to say, how our socialist agriculture is going to develop further. We are carrying the construction of socialism in general constantly forward and will further intensify it. In this context, we are working to intensify agriculture too. But in order to do this successfully, we must raise the political and ideological consciousness in the progressive thinking of our cooperativist masses to a higher level. One of the main problems for achieving this far from easy objective is the work which we must do to combat the remnants of the sense of private property, which still exist, and the petty bourgeois mentality of our rural working people. If we do not do this political and ideological work properly and systematically, we will run into turning AGR coups into state farms. 69. Difficulties during our advance. Naturally, we have worked continually in this direction, and it is true to say that we have achieved results. At the same time, however, nants of the petty bourgeois mentality exist in our countryside and reappear here more strongly, and there more weakly, disappear and return anew in the most varied forms. Of course, we know their forms, but the point is we must know them more thoroughly because they keep changing from time to time. Likewise, we need better knowledge of the level of their intensity, not only among the peasantry as a whole, but also among particular groups in strata of the peasantry. Now let us come to the concrete question, the development of socialist agricultural economies, that is, social property of the whole people and the property of the group. This latter contains an element of capitalism. We have to understand that between the property of the group and the property of the whole people there is a distinction both from the psychological standpoint and in other social aspects. The party knows these things, but I think it ought to know them even better. The property of the group is a form of socialist property, but this form constitutes an intermediate phase. In time it must pass into property of the whole people, and we are working to arrive at that stage. This is a continuing process and movement, which began with the land reform, continued with the socialist collectivization of the peasantry, with the setting up of state farms property of the whole people, and later, with the enlargement of agricultural cooperatives through their unification up to the establishment of higher type cooperatives, which represent a higher level of the socialization of the property of the group on the course of bringing it closer to the property of the whole people, as well as with a series of other socio-economic measures which strengthen the social. 70. Enver Hoxha is character of our agriculture. We must not forget that we have had difficulties in carrying forward this process. Sometimes we have proceeded a little more rapidly, sometimes more slowly, but we have never taken a step backwards and we have never stood still in any phase. As we all know, in the initial phase of collectivization many peasants did not join cooperatives because they were not convinced, while later we came to a situation that all the peasants were convinced and set out on this road of their own free will. But this took about 20 years. Throughout this whole period of development and progress, that is, from the setting up of the first cooperative to the establishment of hundreds of others, and then to their unification in bigger cooperatives, and finally, to the setting up of some tens of higher type cooperatives and other measures which the party has taken, we have had to work very cautiously. Changes in progress have been made in our countryside, not only in the material aspects, but also in the mentality of the peasants, in whom socialist consciousness has been strengthened step by step. Nevertheless, we must never think that now we have reached such a stage of socio-economic development that the petty bourgeois mentality has been eliminated among our peasantry. We must not think that it has been eliminated among the working class either, although in fact it is more advanced than the peasantry, because it is the class which leads the construction of socialism, and the party is the edge of this sword. Because Marxism-Leninism is its ideology, even in the consciousness of the working class there are still remnants of the petty bourgeois psychology and mentality, although less than among the peasantry. But how are they manifested? The party has explained and explains this continuously. The manifestations of narrow personal interests which are observed even among some workers, the efforts of many of them, turning AGR coups into state farms. 71. To keep the work quotas low, the breaches of discipline, the attempts which are seen among individual workers to take more from society and contribute less to it, etc., etc., all these are phenomena and expressions of the petty bourgeois psychology. When we say that such phenomena and manifestations are observed among the working class, it is understandable for us that they are observed among the intellectuals too, indeed somewhat more frequently. And in the intellectuals they are more dangerous than they are in the peasantry, therefore if care is not taken to combat alien manifestations among the intellectuals, they increase in more refined ways, and this greatly damages the work of the party. The intellectuals are sons of the people, of workers and peasants, but since they are cadres, if they set out on a wrong course, submitting both to the pressure of petty bourgeois remnants and the external pressure, the alien manifestations in their consciousness emerge more quickly and become much more dangerous and harmful. At our present stage of development we cannot completely eliminate these alien remnants and manifestations, therefore they will continue to exert a negative influence on our work. This faces us with the task that the struggle which the party wages in this field must be vigorous and unceasing. Now let us come to the problem of agriculture. We have said that the higher type cooperatives are a transitional form of going over to state farms. But when are we going to pass on to this stage? Naturally there is no cute and dry answer to this, but this does not mean that the party should not think about this objective and that the question should be left to spontaneity. The fact is we have not worked as much as we should for this objective, and this is something we certainly must do so that not only the members of higher type cooperatives, but also the Enver Hoxha others be the perspective. The cooperativists have to know that advancing on this course means a qualitative uplift, from the economic standpoint, their way of life, mentality and psychology. The party has not forgotten this objective. I am referring to the care which we must display in the great educational work we must do for the best possible preparation of the party itself so that it will be clear about this course. The party must do more work with greater perspective for this process and development on the ascent, so that it can explain and make it clear to the cooperativists. This is a question of principle and a question of line. It must be made clear to the peasant that, just as he broke with the private property and joined the agricultural cooperative, so he must proceed on this course to the state farm, which is the property of the whole people. However, this has not been explained to him in such a way as to prepare him ideologically, psychologically, economically, and organizationally for this change. Let us come now to the study which is underway in connection with the higher type cooperatives. We have discussed here the problems that emerge for the transformation of the higher type cooperatives into state farms such as economic, payments, administrative, organizational, and other problems. The study may show, for example, what should be done with those funds which the cooperatives possess. As we have discussed previously, we must study what has to be done, for example, over what period we will pay off the cooperatives, so that the members welcome this politically and discontent is not created among them. But the problem is not simply one of pay, it is linked closely also with the necessary goods meant, which must be placed on the market to cover the money which will be given to the cooperativists, a thing which requires improved organization in the circulation of turning AGR coups into state farms. 73. commodities in distribution, etc., it is important that, at the moment of the transformation of the higher type cooperatives into state farms, we are careful to ensure that the society is not unduly burdened and the interests of the cooperativists are not harmed. We have discussed these issues from all aspects. Apart from these, the psychology of the peasants is also a problem. Foreseeing the development of events, in my opinion, they will be unprepared. Therefore, they may become discontented. Why will this occur? Because the facts show that no small number of higher type cooperatives have levels of income and payment to their members which are almost equal to those of the workers of the state farms. When this is achieved within the property of the group, the cooperativists are satisfied because, besides their remuneration for the workdays, they also have their individual plots. When the transformation of cooperatives into state farms is carried out, the state will pay them for the cows, sheep and goats, and so on, which they have owned on their personal plot and in the cooperative. I think that a reasonable price should be paid for their household livestock so that they are not damaged. As to what concrete course will be pursued to this end, this must be studied, because we are now forming joint flocks in more organized ways. In regard to the payment for the livestock of the cooperative, this should be paid in installments. As a result of this, the cooperative is turned into a state farm worker, besides getting the same wage as the worker of the farm, will have an increased income from the payment for the cows, sheep and goats, etc. And this will be one of the ways to compensate partly for the income of some years which the cooperative has secured from the livestock in production of his personal plot. Apart from this, the cooperatives have funds for 74. Enver Hoxha. Investment, which irrespective of when and how the state will give them to the members, are their property too. However, the peasant mentality makes them think, before these are paid off the state will wipe them out, will take them from us, etc., etc. Therefore, I say that for this reason too, preparations must be done from the psychological aspect. Possibly we could quite easily settle the question of the property that comes from the higher type cooperative one way or another, and pay for it according to regulations which will be established. But here a question arises which we must consider carefully. Does the peasant really consciously accept this method which the state may decide, or does he accept it because he is told to? It is essential that we work hard with the cooperativist so that he is convinced, accepts, and understands concretely that the transformation of the cooperative into a state farm will be to his great advantage. That is a mentality that ought to have been inculcated, but up till now this work has not been properly done. When I say this, I have in mind not only that the masses of cooperativists do not really know, but also that the cadres themselves are not fully clear about what is going to be done in this direction. Today they know only that when the time comes the higher type cooperatives will be changed into state farms, but they know nothing about when and how this will come about. The party must prepare them for this because the socialist economic development continually creates new situations. If the problem were presented that a good part of higher type cooperatives should be transformed into state farms right now, it might turn out that the state could not cope with it financially. Therefore, it might be said that this is not the time to take this step, and we should postpone it for a little later. I think that if we put off the solution of this problem for a long time, the problem turning AGR coups into state farms 75 will become even more difficult. However, by proceeding on this course, their accumulation will increase. That is to say, a day will come when the cooperative members say, now, just hang on a moment. Because we cannot agree to be paid 14 or 16 lakhs forever when the yields of agricultural and livestock products are increasing. We want 20 or 22 lakhs per workday. We have a stack of money for investments, etc. Consequently, if this course is pursued, the pay of members of the higher type cooperatives will outstrip that of the members of the state farms. That is why I think that leaving this problem as it is, with the excuse that the time has not come, will create great dangers for us. And where do I see these dangers? In the mentality and psychology of the group property, which continues to grow stronger, as well as in the great differences in the pay of members and in their income from the group property, which will be bigger than those of workers. To prevent this from occurring and to maintain the proper level of pay and income in the cooperatives, the investments must be reduced, but this would mean deliberately hindering the development of agriculture. And we cannot allow this. The party is for the uninterrupted development of productive forces. Hence, major problems are being created for us, into which we must delve more deeply. If we look at the 5-year plan, the investments in agriculture are of two types: state investments and investments made by the agricultural cooperatives. Of course, the investments of the cooperatives are smaller than state investments, which means that the state continues to invest in agriculture and in cooperatives in order to strengthen the situation of the group property. And when the time comes that these cooperatives are transformed into state farms, it seems as though the state ought to pay them. But in fact, by making investments in them, the state is paying 76 Enver Hoxha them in advance. But when did these investments begin to be divided into and calculated as funds of the cooperative and funds of the state within the cooperative? This was done only when we created the higher type cooperatives. However, our proletarian state has invested in cooperatives right from the time they were set up. The bearing in mind of the investments and aid which the state has provided for the higher type cooperatives and for the other cooperatives has political importance, because it shows our concern for raising the group property towards the property of the whole people. In this connection, however, we must struggle to ensure that the cooperatives make full use of their own funds and investments for production and do not content themselves with the results achieved. Apart from the investments which it makes, the state also provides the cooperativist economies with short and long-term credits for investments. And in fact, most of them have repaid the credits and have no debts. Hence, matters have reached such a stage that state credits are not always required. Why does this occur? Because some of the cooperatives have created their own special funds for investments or for the guaranteed pay, etc. But what occurs with some of these investment funds in the cooperatives? They have investment funds in use because with the material base at our disposal we have not had possibilities to draw in these funds, that is to say, to use them to make investments in the cooperative so that in time they would no longer exist as funds. Had we been able to draw in these funds, we would have no need to pay for them as emerges now. Why would we not pay for them? Because they would have been materialized in investments in the land, for seed, and in other directions. What would this have brought about? It would have brought about that the cooperatives would get more production and income and turning AGR coups into state farms 77. Thus, speed up the process of transformation into state farms. We must plan all the investments which are made in the cooperative, dividing them into investments by the cooperative and investments by the state. The accounts must be kept in this way too. This must be done both in order to check up better on how the investments are used and also so that the members of the cooperative understand clearly and know that the group property of the cooperative is not entirely their property, but also belongs to the workers in the socialist state which has invested large sums. This shows clearly that the state is not indebted to the cooperative, but the cooperative is indebted to the state. Why do I say so? Because the production from investments which the state makes in industry, for example, benefits the whole society, while all the production resulting from the use of state investments in the cooperative benefits the cooperative and each of its members. Of course, we do not leave all this production to the cooperatives, because we take part of it through the payments by the cooperatives for the services performed by the state and for the materials which are sold to them, etc. As well as because of those relations between the cooperative and the state which I explained above. But to be in order, we must make the peasant understand these relations, so that he will combat the petty bourgeois mentality in his own mind and implant the sound opinion that the state is not indebted to him. But on the contrary, he is indebted to the state, that he has obligations to the economy, as I said above. By acting in his way, we will proceed towards improvement of the situation. In the existing conditions, when we are required to intensify agriculture, the state may invest in the agricultural cooperatives not 100 but even 200 million leks. To this end, for example, we will carry out drainage and land improvement schemes, will provide better cows, etc. And 78. Enver Hoxha. We do this in order to get more production. But what does the cooperative do with this continual increase of production? It increases the accumulation of the group property. So we must consider this problem more deeply because you see what problem is emerging now. When we want to take a measure to advance further, this problem immediately emerges before us and we begin to think, what are we going to do with these funds? Of course, even today, if you tell the members of economically weak cooperatives that they should go into state farms, they are ready. But the problem which we are discussing has to do with the most developed and economically strong cooperatives, those of the higher type, and their development will not stand still. Here the problem is that the development of the productive forces must be accompanied with the improvement step by step of the socialist relations of production. Thus, the great intensification of our agriculture, which is going to include most of the agricultural cooperatives, especially those of the plain in which we will make investments, more scientific regionalization and agricultural circulation, etc., will lead to uninterrupted growth of production and income. Consequently, this growth requires that we think continually about the further improvement of the socialist relations of production. We have been and are very interested to ensure that agricultural production increases not only in the state farms, but also in the cooperatives, which include about 80% of the area of arable land. If we get ample production, that will be all to the good. Then we will distribute it to the whole country because if agricultural and livestock products of the cooperatives and state farms increase, they will be sold ever more cheaply on the market. As well as this, from this production funds will be secured for investments in agriculture and in heavy and light. Turning AGR, coops, into state farms. 79. Industry in the extracting and processing industry, etc., and the standard of living of the working people will be raised, and we are moving in this direction. All this will be done, not through raising wages, but through reducing prices or keeping them stable, through expanding the number of jobs available and employing new forces who are increasing, and so on. Hence, the problem of turning agricultural cooperatives into state farms and the problems which are linked with this process must be seen as part of the whole and connected closely with our whole advance on the road of socialism, and not as something separate. Or let us take the problem of the cooperativists' personal plots. This is a problem of great economic, ideological, and political importance. Therefore, we must study it very carefully and follow its tendency step by step. We notice that the volume of production and the total income from the plot has remained unchanged or has increased slightly. It is not falling, although there is a tendency for it to diminish overall as against the production of the agricultural cooperatives. The volume of production and income of the cooperative must be increased continually, while that of the peasant plot should steadily diminish. Why? Because since production is increasing and the income of the cooperatives is rising, this means that the needs of the cooperativists are being fulfilled ever better from the collective property, hence, the function of the personal plot should gradually disappear. We must keep an eye on how this matter develops because here lies the biggest worm which eats away at the agricultural cooperative. It is like the nail of Nasruddin, a constant excuse in the village, which keeps the psychology of the private ownership alive among the cooperativists. And if we do not see the problems in this way, the personal plot will be another obstacle which emerges before us on the course of turning cooperatives into state farms. Now after decades of the coup era. 80. Enver Hoxha. Tivist economy, we must not support the idea that the personal plot should assist the peasant economy as strongly as we did at the start of collectivization. No, this is not correct and cannot be presented in the same way for all the cooperatives, both for those which are weakest and for those which are the most advanced and of the higher type. If the cooperativist plot is considered, and is for a certain time, an auxiliary economy for the families in the weak cooperatives, is it so and to the same degree for the families of the advanced cooperatives? These are not minor matters which have to do with the opening of one or two shops to supply the cooperativists, but are major problems of principle which must be understood and solved correctly, always accompanied with strong organizational measures, otherwise, we will have negative consequences. The problem of the possibilities which are being created for turning 3, 4, 5, or 6 higher type cooperatives into state farms must be looked at with this eye. And even if we manage to solve the problem from the psychological, political, economic, and other standpoints, still perfect organization is required. Now let us come to the problem of forming joint flocks of the peasants' household livestock, which the Ministry of Agriculture says is being solved. Let us hear how it is being solved. Is this problem being solved in such a way that the petty bourgeois mentality of peasants is being combated properly? What I am getting at is that the peasants must be convinced and sure that from these animals with which joint flocks are formed, they will have a material gain in return, i.e. that they will be supplied with milk and meat and will be given wool for any need they might have, or will be sold cloth in place of the wool they would have taken from their household animals. However, if these needs are not fulfilled with the turning AGR, coops, into state farms, 81. Joint flocks, then we are not achieving the aim of raising the well-being of the cooperativists. I am convinced that the way we are proceeding with this question is correct, but it must be examined politically and ideologically to ensure that it is advantageous and that the administrative, organizational, and financial arrangements are such that the peasant is not dissatisfied. The state must respond to his needs not simply with money because it will pay him money, but with goods, regular supplies of which should be provided for the peasants without shortages. In regard to the rest of cows and other livestock belonging to the cooperative, the state must certainly buy them at a price which ensures that the cooperativist is interested in selling them to the state and will not slaughter them. This is how we should handle the problem of the livestock. Now let us come to the buildings of the cooperative. Who has made investments for them? Obviously, if the state also has made investments for them, we must tell the cooperativist how much the state has invested and how much the cooperative. If only the cooperative has made investments for the stalls, then the problem must be studied carefully. Then we come to other problems, for example, who has made investments for the blocks of fruit trees? If we suppose that in the sector one part of the investments has been made by the state, while another part by the co, then the cooperative has no obligations to the operative, state, and the state has no obligations to the cooperative. If the state has provided a credit and the cooperative has repaid it, again the products belong to the cooperative and the state. Their value must pay compensation to. And speeches 1980 to 1981 Inch reports.